Since 2020, the US dollar has lost 25% of its purchasing power. Let me put that in terms that actually matter to you. If you had $100,000 saved in 2020, every reserve currency in history has collapsed following the same predictable pattern. The British pound sterling dominated global trade for over a century before its collapse. The Dutch guilder before that, the Spanish real, the Portuguese real, the French livre. 5 reserve currencies, 5 collapses, and every single one followed the same 8 stages. The US dollar is currently at stage 6. We are not in the early warning phase anymore. We are not in the something might happen territory. We are deep into the collapse sequence, and the Federal Reserve's actions over the past 5 years have not just failed to stop it, they've accelerated it. I've spent months analyzing Federal Reserve policy documents, FOMC meeting transcripts, balance sheet data going back to 2008, and comparing them to the monetary patterns that preceded every major currency collapse of the past 500 years. The pattern is identical. The language is identical. The policy responses are identical. And the timeline is compressing faster than any previous collapse in history. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how the Federal Reserve is engineering this collapse, why they mathematically cannot stop it, even if they wanted to, what happens to your savings, your retirement, and your purchasing power when stage 7 hits, and most importantly, what you can do right now to protect yourself before the window closes. Let's get into it. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers don't lie, even when the Federal Reserve does. The official inflation rate right now sits around 2.4%. That's what the Fed tells you. That's what the news reports. That's the number that determines your Social Security adjustment, your wage negotiations, your rent increases. 2.4%. Now let me show you reality. Since January 2020, eggs are up 147%. Ground beef is up 31%. Electricity is up 32%. Car insurance is up 54%. Rent in major cities is up 30 to 40%. Here's why that matters to you. The Federal Reserve has printed $8 trillion since 2020. $8 trillion created from nothing. The M2 money supply, that's the total amount of dollars in circulation, went from $15.4 trillion in February 2020 to $21.70 trillion by April 2022. That's a 40% increase in the money supply in just 2 years. In the entire history of the United States, we had never printed that much money in such a short period. Not during the Civil War, not during World War I, not during World War II, not during the 2008 financial crisis. In 2 years, we printed more money than in the previous century combined. And where did that money go? It didn't go to you. The average stimulus check was $1,400. Meanwhile, the stock market gained $15 trillion. Real estate values exploded. The wealth of billionaires increased by $1.7 trillion in 2020 alone. The money was printed in your name, added to the national debt that you and your children will pay, and transferred directly to asset holders. Your purchasing power was stolen to inflate the portfolios of people who were already wealthy. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is monetary mechanics. Let me break down how money printing actually works, because once you understand this, you can never unsee it. The Federal Reserve is not a government agency. Read that again. The Federal Reserve is not part of the U.S. government. It's a private banking cartel created in 1913 that has a government-granted monopoly on creating US dollars. When the government needs money it doesn't have, it doesn't go to the American people and ask for it. It issues treasury bonds, which are basically IOUs. The Federal Reserve then buys these bonds by creating money out of thin air. They don't have a vault somewhere with $8 trillion in it. They literally type numbers into a computer and those numbers become money. This is called monetizing the debt. And it's exactly what destroyed the Weimar Republic, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, and every other country that tried it. Think of it like a Ponzi scheme, but legal. Imagine you're playing Monopoly with your family. Everyone has a set amount of money. The game works because the money supply is fixed. Now imagine the banker, your cousin who always cheats, decides to print himself an extra $5,000 whenever he wants. What happens? Prices on the board explode. Your $200 for passing go becomes worthless. Here's the problem. Once you start printing, you can't stop. Every dollar printed makes the existing dollars worth less. That's inflation. To combat inflation, you raise interest rates. But when you raise interest rates, the government's debt payments explode because we have $36 trillion in debt. Current interest payments on the national debt are now over $1 trillion per year. That's more than we spend on the military. More than we spend on Medicare, the interest alone. If rates go higher, those payments become $1.5 trillion. $2 trillion. At some point, we can't even pay the interest without printing more money. And printing more money causes more inflation, which requires higher rates, which increases debt payments, which requires more printing. This is called a debt spiral, and we are in one right now. So why is the Fed doing this? Are they incompetent, malicious, or trapped in a system they can't control? The answer is option 3. The Federal Reserve is not destroying the dollar because they want to. They're destroying the dollar because they have no other choice. The system was designed with a fatal flaw, and we're watching that flaw play out in real time. Let me take you back to August 15th, 1971, because that's when everything changed. That as the date President Richard Nixon went on national television and announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at the fixed rate of $35 per ounce. He called it temporary. 54 years later, we're still waiting for the temporary measure to end. Before 1971, the dollar was backed by gold. For every dollar in circulation, there was supposed to be a corresponding amount of gold sitting in Fort Knox. This constrained how much money the government could print. If they printed too much, other countries would show up and demand gold, which would drain the reserves and expose the fraud. France actually did this in the 1960s, sending ships to collect their gold, which is part of why Nixon closed the gold window. After 1971, the dollar became what's called a fiat currency. Fiat means by decree in Latin. The dollar has value because the government says it has value. That's it. No gold backing. No silver backing. No commodity backing of any kind. Just the full faith and credit of the United States government. The same government that's $36 trillion in debt. The same government that runs trillion-dollar deficits every single year. The same government that just printed 40% of all dollars in existence in 24 months. Here's the parallel that should terrify you. In 1971, Nixon faced mounting war debt from Vietnam. 14 years of military spending that had drained the treasury. In 2024 and 2025, we're facing mounting war debt from Ukraine, Israel, and potential conflicts with Iran and China. Military spending is at all-time highs. In 1971, Nixon faced international pressure on dollar reserves. France and other nations were demanding gold because they didn't trust U.S. fiscal policy. In 2025, we're facing international pressure from BRICS nations who are actively building an alternative to the dollar-based system. Russia, China, Brazil, India, South Africa, and now Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE are conducting trade in currencies other than the dollar. In 1971, inflation was creeping towards 6%, and the Fed had lost control of prices. In 2022, inflation hit 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. They've pushed it down to 2.4% officially, but as we discussed, real inflation is much higher, and it's not staying down. The conditions that caused 1971 are not just present today, they're worse in every measurable way. The debt is higher. The money printing is more extreme. The international pressure is more organized. And the inflation is more entrenched. What happened after Nixon closed the gold window? The dollar lost 50% of its purchasing power in the following decade. Gold went from $35 an ounce to $850 by 1980. Interest rates had to be raised to 20%. Under Paul Volcker to finally kill the inflation, which caused 2 brutal recessions. The American middle class was devastated. Savings accounts that had taken decades to build were wiped out in years. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, it's rhyming perfectly. Let me show you the 8 stages of reserve currency collapse because this is the framework that predicts everything. Stage 1 is financial dominance. The country has the world's largest economy, strongest military, and most trusted institutions. This was the United States from 1944 to 1971. We won World War II, established the Bretton Woods system, and made the dollar the world's reserve currency. Stage 2 is debt expansion. The dominant country begins borrowing heavily, often to fund wars and social programs. This was the U.S. from 1965 to 1985, with Vietnam, the Great Society, and the early welfare state. Stage 3 is monetary expansion. The central bank begins printing money to cover debts that can't be repaid through taxation. This was 1971 to 2008, the closing of the gold window followed by decades of gradually expanding money supply. Stage 4 is crisis and intervention. A financial crisis hits, and the central bank responds with unprecedented money printing. This was 2008 when the Fed printed $3.5 trillion in response to the housing collapse. Stage 5 is addiction and dependency. The economy becomes dependent on money printing. Any attempt to reduce stimulus causes market crashes and economic pain. This was 2013 to 2020. Remember the taper tantrum when the Fed tried to reduce bond purchases and the market threw a fit? The system was already addicted. Stage 6 is terminal money printing. A major crisis triggers the final wave of printing that destroys the currency's purchasing power. This was 2020 to present. COVID was the trigger. $8 trillion was printed, and now we're living in the aftermath. Stage 7 is loss of confidence. Foreign and domestic holders begin dumping the currency. Velocity of money increases and inflation becomes uncontrollable. This is what's coming. Stage 8 is collapse and reset. The currency either hyperinflates to worthlessness or is forcibly replaced with a new system. This is how every reserve currency transition in history has ended. We are at stage 6. The printing has happened. The damage is done. The question now is how quickly we move to stage 7 and what triggers the transition. Based on the historical pattern and current conditions, I believe we enter stage 7 between late 2025 and mid-2026. Here's the timeline. Right now, in late 2025, we're in the eye of the storm. The Fed has paused rate hikes. Inflation appears controlled on paper. The stock market is near all-time highs. Everything seems fine. This is exactly what happened in 1929 before the crash, in 2007 before the housing collapse, in 1999 before the dot-com bust. The calm before the storm is always the most dangerous time because it breeds complacency. By early 2026, one of 3 triggers will likely hit. Trigger 1 is a major bank failure. The regional banking crisis of 2023 was a warning shot. We saw Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic collapse in weeks. The Fed stepped in with emergency lending facilities, printing hundreds of billions to stop the contagion. But the underlying problems weren't solved. They were papered over. Commercial real estate loans are going bad at accelerating rates. Office buildings in major cities are worth 50 to 70% of their pre-COVID values, and those loans are sitting on bank balance sheets. When those loans default, and they will, we'll see another wave of bank failures. And the Fed will have to print trillions more to stop it. Trigger 2 is the BRICS payment system going live. Saudi Arabia has already begun accepting yuan for oil sales. The BRICS nations are building a payment infrastructure that bypasses SWIFT and the dollar entirely. When a major oil producer permanently shifts away from dollar-denominated sales, the demand for dollars collapses. Right now, every country needs dollars to buy oil. That artificial demand is the only thing propping up the dollar's value despite all the printing. Remove that demand, and the currency goes into freefall. Trigger 3 is the Treasury market breaking. The 10-year Treasury yield is the benchmark for all interest rates in America. Mortgage, car loans, corporate bonds, everything is priced off the 10-year. If foreign buyers, who currently hold about $8 trillion of our debt, begin selling instead of buying, yields spike. We saw this briefly in October 2023 when the 10-year touched 5%. If it breaks above 5.5% and stays there, the entire financial system seizes up. We're currently at 4.4%. One crisis away. By mid-2026, the Fed will be forced to choose. When one of these triggers hits, they have 3 options. Option 1 is raise rates aggressively to defend the dollar. This crashes the stock market, housing market, and economy. Unemployment spikes. Businesses fail. The political fallout is catastrophic. Option 2 is print more money to bail out whatever is failing. This accelerates inflation, destroys purchasing power faster, and moves us into stage 7 immediately. Option 3 is do nothing and hope it resolves itself. This never works and always makes the eventual crisis worse. History tells us what they'll choose. In every single currency collapse, the central bank chose option 2, print. They always print because the short-term political pain of recession is worse than the long-term economic pain of currency destruction. The Fed will print, the dollar will fall, your purchasing power will evaporate. The only question is whether you're positioned for it. By late 2026, stage 7 will be in full swing. Here's what stage 7 looks like. Foreign central banks accelerate their selling of treasury bonds. They're already net sellers for the first time in decades. This becomes a stampede. The dollar index, which measures the dollar against other major currencies, falls below 90. It's at 106 now. When it was at 89 in 2020, people were panicking. It goes lower. Inflation officially breaks above 5% again, but real inflation, the grocery store and gas pump inflation, hits 15 to 20%. Wages can't keep up because companies are also struggling with higher costs. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, fall another 10 to 15%. The middle class gets crushed. The Fed is forced into a choice between hyperinflation and depression. They choose inflation because you can't print your way out of a depression, but you can print your way into one. Gold breaks $3,500 an ounce. This isn't fear-mongering. This is pattern recognition. This is what happened to the British pound after World War II. This is what happened to the French franc in the 1960s. This is what happened to every reserve currency that overprinted its way into oblivion. The United States is not special. We're not exempt from the laws of monetary physics. We've just had the luxury of being the world's reserve currency, which bought us time. That time is running out. Now, here's what they don't want you to understand. The Federal Reserve knows all of this. They have the same data I'm showing you. They have better data. They have entire departments dedicated to monetary history and crisis modeling. They know where this leads. So why are they doing it? Because the alternative is worse. For them, let me explain. The Federal Reserve exists to serve two masters, and neither of them is you. Master one is the federal government. The government runs trillion-dollar deficits every year. It needs to borrow that money. If interest rates rise too high, the government can't afford its debt payments. The Fed keeps rates low and prints money to buy bonds, which keeps the government funded. Master two is the banking system. The Fed was created by bankers, for bankers. When banks fail, the Fed bails them out. When banks need liquidity, the Fed provides it. When bank profits are threatened, the Fed adjusts policy to protect them. Your purchasing power, your savings, your retirement, those aren't even on the list of considerations. The Fed isn't trying to destroy the dollar. They're trying to maintain a system that mathematically cannot be maintained. They're choosing slow destruction over fast collapse. They're hoping to kick the can down the road until it's someone else's problem, but the road is running out. So what do you do about it? Here's where we get practical. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. But I am someone who spent hundreds of hours studying monetary history, currency collapses, and wealth preservation strategies. Here's what the data suggests, and here's what I'm personally doing. Strategy 1 is to reduce your exposure to dollar-denominated assets. This sounds complicated, but it's simple. If you have all your wealth in dollars, cash savings, bonds, dollar-denominated stocks, you're holding a melting ice cube. Every day, your purchasing power declines. Diversifying means moving a portion, I suggest 20 to 30%, into assets that hold value when currencies fall. This includes hard assets like gold and silver, international stocks denominated in other currencies, real estate in areas with strong fundamentals, and yes, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I know crypto is controversial, but here's the reality. Bitcoin was designed specifically as a hedge against central bank money printing. It has a fixed supply of 21 million coins. The Fed can print unlimited dollars, but nobody can print more Bitcoin. In every country that's experienced currency crisis, from Venezuela to Argentina to Turkey, Bitcoin has outperformed the local currency by orders of magnitude. This isn't about getting rich. It's about not getting poor. Strategy 2 is to lock in fixed-rate debt strategically. This is counterintuitive, but debt can be your friend in an inflationary environment. If you have a 3% mortgage and inflation runs at 8%, you're effectively being paid to borrow. The dollars you pay back are worth less than the dollars you borrowed. This is why wealthy people took on massive debt during the low-rate environment. They knew inflation would erode the real value. I'm not saying go into debt recklessly. I'm saying if you have the opportunity to lock in fixed-rate financing on appreciating assets, real estate being the primary example, it's worth considering. Strategy 3 is to build income streams that adjust with inflation. Your salary probably doesn't keep pace with real inflation. Most people get 2 to 3% raises while real inflation runs 5 to 8%. You're falling behind every year. The solution is to build income sources that automatically adjust. This could be a business with pricing power where you can raise prices as costs increase. It could be rental income since rents tend to track inflation. It could be dividend stocks from companies that have pricing power. The goal is to have income that rises with inflation, not income that's fixed while inflation eats it away. Strategy 4 is to reduce unnecessary expenses and increase your savings rate. I know this sounds basic, but it's crucial. The average American savings rate is 3.4%, the lowest since 2008. That means people are spending 96.6 cents of every dollar they earn. When the crisis hits, those people are one missed paycheck from disaster. Aim for a 20 to 30% savings rate. Cut subscriptions you don't use. Reduce dining out. Delay major purchases. Every dollar you save today is a dollar you can deploy when asset prices crash, and they will crash. There will be buying opportunities in the chaos, but only for people who have cash ready. Strategy 5 is to develop skills that are valuable in any economic environment. Currency collapses don't make the world stop. People still need food, shelter, healthcare, security, and entertainment. If you have skills that provide these things, you'll always have income. This means practical skills like plumbing, electrical work, and construction. Professional skills like healthcare, accounting, and law. Digital skills like programming, marketing, and content creation. In the Weimar hyperinflation, doctors did fine. Skilled tradespeople did fine. People with fixed salaries paid in marks got destroyed. Be the doctor, not the salary worker. Let me bring this back to the big picture because I want you to understand the stakes. The Federal Reserve has printed more money in the last 5 years than in the previous century. The dollar has lost 25% of its purchasing power since 2020. The national debt is $36 trillion and growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments on that debt now exceed $1 trillion per year. Every reserve currency in history has collapsed under similar conditions. We are at stage 6 of an 8-stage collapse pattern. The Fed cannot raise rates enough to stop inflation without crashing the economy. They cannot print more without accelerating inflation. They cannot do nothing without the system seizing up. There is no good option. There is only managed decline. The question isn't if this happens. The question is whether you're positioned when it does. Most Americans will watch their savings get destroyed. They'll watch their retirement get pushed back. They'll watch their purchasing power evaporate while politicians blame each other and the Fed pretends everything is fine. They'll wake up one morning and realize their $500,000 portfolio buys what $250,000 used to. And they'll have no idea how it happened because nobody told them. Now, you understand how money printing works. You understand the historical pattern. You understand why the Fed can't stop what's coming. You understand the timeline. And you understand what you can do to protect yourself. The Federal Reserve is not your friend. They do not care about your savings. They do not care about your retirement. They care about maintaining a system that benefits the government and the banks in that order. Your purchasing power is collateral damage. The sooner you accept that reality, the sooner you can take action to protect yourself. We're living through the end of an era. The post-1971 fiat dollar experiment is reaching its mathematical limits. What comes next could be a new gold-backed system. A central bank digital currency with total government control over your spending. A BRICS-led alternative that sidelines America entirely, or some combination we haven't imagined yet. But one thing is certain. The purchasing power of the dollar you hold today will be worth significantly less in 5 years. That's not pessimism. That's mathematics. Remember the 8 stages. Dominance, debt expansion, monetary expansion, crisis and intervention, addiction and dependency, terminal printing, loss of confidence, collapse, and reset. We've been through stages 1 through 6. Stage 7 is loss of confidence, and the triggers are lining up. Bank failures, BRICS alternatives, treasury market stress, any one of them could tip us over the edge. I've shown you the data. I've shown you the history. I've shown you the pattern. What you do with this information is up to you. You can dismiss it as doom and gloom and hope everything works out. Some people did that in Weimar Germany. Some people did that in Zimbabwe. Some people did that in Venezuela. They're not doing great now. Or you can take action. You can reduce your dollar exposure. You can build alternative income streams. You can develop valuable skills. You can position yourself to not just survive what's coming, but potentially thrive in it. The greatest wealth transfers in history happened during monetary crises. The Great Depression created more millionaires than the Roaring '20s. The 2008 financial crisis made fortunes for people who saw it coming. This crisis will be no different. Assets will go on sale. Opportunities will emerge. But only for people who are prepared. Only for people who saw it coming. Only for people who had the cash and the courage to act when everyone else was panicking. You now have information that 99% of Americans don't have. You understand what's happening and why. You understand the timeline. You understand what to do. The question is, will you act on it? The Federal Reserve is destroying the dollar right now. They've printed $8 trillion. They've inflated away 25% of your purchasing power. They're trapped in a debt spiral with no exit. The historical pattern says we have 12 to 18 months before stage 7 hits. That's not a lot of time, but it's enough. It's enough to reposition your savings. Enough to build alternative income. Enough to prepare for what's coming. Don't be one of the millions who wake up after the collapse wondering what happened. You've been warned. You understand the system. You know the playbook. Now execute. If this video helped you understand what's coming, share it with someone who needs to see this. Your family, your friends. The people whose financial futures you care about. This information is too important to keep to yourself. Hit the subscribe button because I'll be covering this crisis as it unfolds, showing you the warning signs in real time, and giving you actionable strategies to protect yourself. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update. The next 12 months are going to be turbulent. The financial system you've known your entire life is changing. The dollar's reign as world reserve currency is ending. But for those who understand what's happening and position accordingly, this isn't a crisis. It's an opportunity. The biggest opportunity of our lifetimes. The Federal Reserve is destroying the dollar. Now you know how. Now you know why. Now you know what to do about it. The rest is up to you.